Italy has always been portrayed in movies as a romantic destination, but tucked behind the glitz and glamour is a terrifying past that is steadily getting worse as time passes.
This was corruption on a major scale, collusion between politicians and businessmen, some suspect even the mafia. It's become known as Tangentopoli, Kickback City, and it struck a latent nerve in Italy.
From the Manipulite scandal of the 1990s that saw a total of 1,300 people convicted for corruption, to the current unemployment woes of their youth that has dominoed into other compounding problems for the country that the outside world doesn't know about. The story of Italy may not be as glamorous as it seems on the surface, and today we'll be talking about just how dark Italy's past, and quite frankly its future, could possibly be. Our attempt to unveil Italy's true colors starts in the 1990s, when the country began to stumble and fall behind every other European country on all major economic indicators, such as income per person, labor productivity, investment, export market shares, and many more. And to compound their declining economic performance, the 1990s would also be the time of the Bribesville scandal that resulted in the Manipulite investigation, which in the end led to the collapse of the then-dominant Christian Democrat and Socialist parties. Tangentopoli, which is Italian for Bribesville, was the name people used to indicate the corruption-based system that had dominated Italy during the time, up until the Manipulite investigation started to unravel these heinous crimes in 1992, which was spearheaded by Antonio Di Pietro. The investigations would catch their biggest hitters in 1993, after a $250 million affair involving Eni, the government-controlled national energy company, was revealed. This revelation led to Eni's former president, Gabriel Cagliari's conviction, and his wife to give back $3 million worth of illegal funds her husband had stolen when he was still alive. Former leader of the Italian Socialist Party, Bettino Craxi, would also be charged with corruption after he admitted that his party received $93 million of illegal funds. And the biggest catch of them all would be from the Lega Nord party, where the secretary Umberto Bossi and former treasurer Alessandro Patelli was convicted for receiving 200 million lire of illegal funding. In the following year, investigators shifted their attention to Silvio Berlusconi and his many industries to see if there were any anomalies that would point to their unlawful practices. But just as investigators were doing so, Berlusconi would enter the political world and win the elections that year as the country's prime minister. Berlusconi would show his true intentions for entering politics after his brother Paolo would be convicted of corruption crimes, to which he would respond by making a new law that would avoid jail time for most corruption crimes. This would be the start of a lengthy battle between Antonio Di Pietro and Silvio Berlusconi, and the battle would end in a stalemate, with Di Pietro eventually resigning from his position on December 6th of the same year. And 2 weeks after that, Berlusconi's government was forced to resign before a critical confidence vote in Parliament, which he was expected to fail. Berlusconi would also be charged with corrupted practices after he had stepped down from the government. But he wouldn't be convicted of these crimes until October 2012. By the end of the investigations, over 1,300 persons were either convicted and sentenced or accepted plea bargains. As for Berlusconi, this would not be the last time the country would have to deal with his actions. But before we continue on about just how evil Berlusconi is, consider subscribing to the channel, since you obviously found our video fascinating by making it this long in the video. Now let's get back to it. Once the mid-2000s rolled in, and once again under Silvio Berlusconi's reign as prime minister, the Sismi telecom scandal came to light, where reportedly 5,000 persons' phones were unlawfully tapped. The scandal was uncovered as part of the ongoing investigation of the Imam Rapido case, where investigators would inadvertently come across an illegal domestic surveillance program run by Marco Mancini, who at the time was the former number 2 of the Sismi military intelligence agency. Giuliano Tavaroli, who was the chief of security at the Italian telecom at the time, and Private Florentine Detective Emanuele Cipriani. In July 2006, Tavaroli's predecessor Adamo Bove would disclose Tavaroli's actions to the Milan magistrates, which led to the top-secret investigation that led to the arrest of Marco Mancini and Emanuele Cipriani later that year. By the end of the trials, it was revealed that there were 5,000 targets under this illegal surveillance program, which ranged from politicians to referees. And speaking of politicians, at the tail end of these investigations, Silvio Berlusconi was yet again found guilty of unlawful sexual practices after evidence of these actions came to light, as his phones were tapped as well. Berlusconi would be convicted of these crimes in March 2013, and Italy would finally move on from Berlusconi after this. But the country would still be in bad shape as the 2010s arrived, with new problems to be solved. One of which is the growing unemployment amongst the youth between the ages of 15 and 24. By 2017, the country would have a 35.1% unemployment rate, which would be double the average rate of the EU member states, which sat at 16.7%. And with every country recovering from the effects of the pandemic this past 2 years, the youth unemployment rate is still in recovery as the country still has a 23.8% youth unemployment rate. As of April 2022, with the country trailing only Greece, which has 36.8% youth unemployment rate, and Spain, who has 28.9%. Many experts point to the lack of preparation and guidance that the schools offer their students to seemingly transition into the workforce after their graduation. Because once an Italian student finished up his studies, he or she is left without any experience to bargain with once they enter the employment market, due to the lack of vocational training in their curriculums. Experts would also point to the 2008 recession as a key contributor to the country's unemployment rate, as more Italians choose to further their studies during these times, which made it harder for graduates to get employed, as there were more people competing for the same positions with the same credentials. This also made them overqualified for jobs that were readily available, such as jobs in manufacturing and exporting. The lack of employment opportunities and a government notorious for corruption is what is pushing young Italians to leave their country. Since 2008, 2 million young Italians have left the country to find better opportunities abroad. And of those who were able to find a job in the northern parts of Europe, these immigrators are able to make between 29 to 48% more than their counterparts who chose to stay in Italy. And those who choose to stay, 64.3% of them that are between the ages of 18 and 34 still live with their parents. These people are called bambaccioni, or big babies. Of these bambaccionis, only 37% of them had a stable job for 5 years after their studies, while a third of them had to settle for a string of temporary jobs. The combination of the lack of employment opportunities in the country and the increasing number of Italians leaving the country for employment opportunities puts the government in a tough situation, as they will reap fewer rewards for their investments in the education sector, which could possibly end up with the government not paying much attention to the education system, a system that is already currently faulty, as we have discovered earlier. But only time will tell if the country will be able to dig itself out of this hole. But one thing is for sure, this will be the start of the country's demise if they do not act fast. Subscribe for weekly country breakdowns. Next time, the dark side of Hawaii.